There are no victims here. I don't think. I know there aren't. Because Reverend Frank is teaching you. You're not a victim. But we begin to sense, sometimes we may fall into it every once in a while. We all do. We begin to sense a connection with the Spirit of God. And we realize that those who transcend seeming circumstances or so-called negative events realize that it does not have the final word in their life. Joseph in the Bible, who was able to interpret dreams, is a great example of that. As you recall that particular story, he had the ability to interpret dreams, and his brothers were jealous of him. And so they set him up so that he was eventually imprisoned by the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh found out that he had the ability to interpret dreams, so he called him in, and he interpreted his dreams, and it was very beneficial to the Pharaoh, and eventually he not only got out of prison, became the top right-hand man for the Pharaoh. And sometime later in the story, his brothers had to come to Joseph because they were going through their own challenges of a famine in their land. And they didn't recognize who he was. And as I mentioned earlier, Joseph was kind of like toying with them a little bit and had them kept coming back and giving them grain and food and so forth. And then one day, Joseph revealed who he was to his brothers, and his brothers said, "Oh, Joseph, we're so sorry what we did to you." And Joseph said, "Hold on, brothers. You did nothing to me. You see, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." You see, there's a very telling statement there. He was saying that you have no power over me. You see, if he had lived in the consciousness of, look what they have done to me, this is terrible, this is bad, he would have been under the mental law of human experiential living, described as impossibility thinking, not enough, there's lack, limitation, scarcity, incurable diseases. He did not operate under that law. He kept his attention upward. He was under the law of God, all-powerful. Therefore, the event was neutral, and he became a place for the demonstration and the resurrection of the power of God. What we must do as we move forward and rise above circumstances is simply stop viewing ourselves strictly from the human experiential realm, proclaiming, look what they have done to us. Instead, proclaim and affirm ourselves as spiritual beings, and when we look at our repeats in our life, and come about because we're still holding on of look what they have done to me. Look what they have done to my Lord, Tada. Look what they did to Nelson Mandela, 27 years in prison in preparation to become president. Understand, they've done nothing. No situation, no circumstance, nobody has any power over us, nothing but the presence of God. And only to the degree that we accept it as our story, look what they have done to me. But we can change our story and place our attention on the irrepressible ideas of God. And Spirit will take over. And whatever circumstance in life, and turn it around to something magnificent. It'll be a stepping stone, a signpost, a signet, an advertisement for God. That's what it can become in our life. Which means, of course, we must be willing to be changed by the renewing of our minds. Oftentimes, we don't realize that we have to go through this change. And as I mentioned, sometimes transformation is as painful as our resistance is to it. There's a story that I tell from time to time about a sculptor who wanted to sculpt a magnificent piece of art for a shrine that had just been built, a ashram, I guess you would call it. And he got a huge rock. And he split the rock in half, and he decided to start sculpting on one half of the rock, and he started chiseling, and the rock yelled out, "Leave me alone. Don't touch me. I don't want to change. Get away from here." And he, being a nature lover, said, "Okay, I'll just go on the other half of the rock." And so he sculpted this magnificent sculpture. At the end of the day, a shaman came to christen it, and he had to stand on the initial rock just to reach it and poured oil on it and incense and, magnificent, aromas around it and prayed over it, magnificent prayers. And after they left, the rock that had been sculpted was asked by the original rock, what gives? All day long, these people have been standing on my back while you've been getting the good stuff, the oil, the incense. And the sculpted rock said, well, you would not let the sculptor work on you. You would not let the sculptor change you. You would not let the sculptor transform you, so you have merely become a stepping stone where I become a place where people and beauty shines forward. Understand that our destiny will become a stepping stone unless we're willing for our surface to be transformed to glorify the living God, to be willing to be changed by the speaking of a word, to willing to be touched by the Spirit. And of course, to be touched means that we're going to be different. We're going to be changed. We're not going to be the same person. Understand, so many people, they want to change the world while they remain the same. Impossible. So many people want to change the relationships while they remain the same. Impossible. So many people want to change the society while they remain the same. Impossible. We must be willing to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, realizing the thoughts that we keep are a preview to the life experiences that we have. As Jesus said, it's done unto you as you believe. See, you may be going through something, as we all do from time to time. We may call it bad. The world has put a label on it. And if you bought into that label, we made it our story. Slow learner, too tall, too short, too light, too dark, overeducated, undereducated, not enough money, too much money. But that's impossible, as I mentioned earlier. I don't know why I was thinking about that. You can't have too much money. As I think I mentioned once before, that I want everybody to get rich because it takes a lot of money to transform the world. So yes, we need to use it and put it to a great purpose. But if we bought into any of those beliefs, we're putting ourselves under the mental law of human experiential living, and we'll reap what we sow until we pull ourselves out of it. Understand that we're here to pull ourselves out of that law, because when we put our attention on the presence of God, we know that energy flows where the attention goes. And that's what we want to remind ourselves. I think it all comes down to how we view our life and our interpretation of it. You know, in the book of Genesis, it reminds us that we have the ability to name things and to label things. However we name it, that's what it becomes for us. As I was thinking about a person that come to me who was doing individual research on work and vision. And they asked me the question, what do you say to an individual who has lost their job? They're experiencing contraction or lack and limitation. They're experiencing a sense of hopelessness. Things are looking bleak. And the despair is everywhere. And I said, well, basic spiritual law tells us that how we look at a particular situation or circumstance determines what it is for us. Because every thought is creative. Every thought has a tendency to manifest its own kind. So I'll say to all of us as we move forward, we must begin to realize that we are on a great adventure in life. And individuals on an adventure have an entirely different way of looking at the world than an individual who's afraid of loss, an individual afraid of lack or limitation or afraid of losing, and placing their attention on not enough resources, not enough time, or not enough this, or not enough that. You understand that when we're on an adventure, we may not have in a given moment enough money. We may not have a car. We may not have a job. We may not know how to get from A to B. But we're on an adventure. And when we're on that adventure, there's a heightened awareness of truth. And when we know we're on that adventure, we know that it is going to work out. We're just going to look and see how it's going to work out. It's going to work out. And we'll say, I'm on an adventure here. And when you're on an adventure, sometimes we must realize we cannot define ourselves by visible resources. We don't want to define ourselves by circumstances that seem to hold us captive. We define ourselves by our inner attitude. I'm on an adventure. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but I know it's going to be good because God is there. And God always shows up. So as we go forth into this adventure called life in 2010, it's going to be good because God is here. Because God can never be anywhere else than right where we are. For who I am, God is, and all is well. Peace and blessings to you as we go forth and multiply the good that is everywhere.